Hello friends. In the previous lecture, we had discussed about the salient features of the Constitution of United States. In continuation with that, today we will discuss about the federal system, separation of powers, and checks and balances in the Constitution of United States. This is part of our political science lecture series, paper entitled Comparative Government and Politics, or simply Select War Constitutions. Now let us recap a little bit of what we had discussed in the previous lecture. First, the Constitution of the United States is the world's oldest written national constitution still in use. With just about 7,700 words, the Constitution of the United States is also among the shortest. This Constitution of the United States was drafted and signed in 1787 and became operationalized in 1789. Meaning to say, the Constitution of USA has been enforced since 1789. Coming to the overview of the topic under discussion, federalism is a government in which the same territory is controlled by two levels of government, usually the center and states. Both the national or central government and the states have the power to make laws with certain level of autonomy from each other. In other words, in a federal system of government, there is always two levels of government, one at the center or national level and another at the provincial or state level. In the case of United States, there is the federal government at the center and the 50 states on the other that make up the United States Federation. In the United States, the Constitution has established a system of dual sovereignty under which the states have surrendered many of their powers to the federal government, but also retain some sovereignty. Originally, the American Federation was created by 13 states by surrendering some of their sovereign powers. However, the number of these states have increased to 50 at present. The Supreme Court of the United States described USA or United States of America as an indestructible union composed of indestructible states. This means that once a state becomes part of the United States of America, it cannot live again, or it cannot secede away from the United States. Similarly, the union or the central cannot also break or alter the boundary of any of the states. In short, United States is a country which cannot be broken or which cannot be divided under any circumstances. The original draft of the Constitution of 1787 had only 7 articles, but it has been amended 27 times since it became enforced in 1789. Among these 7 articles, the first 3 articles talks about separation of powers, and the next 3 articles, that is 4 to 6, deals with the concept of federalism, and the last, that is Article 7, establishes the procedure subsequently used by the 13 states to ratify it. Now, let us look at some of the terms associated with federalism, or the topic of discussion today. These are confederation, unitary system, and federalism or federal system. Under this, we also have cooperative federalism and dual federalism. Now, the first one, there is confederation. Confederation simply refers to those government where there is high decentralization of power. In other words, confederation are those countries where equal entities or sovereign states come together and form alliance for defense or any other agreed purposes. On the other hand, unitary system refers to those government where there is high centralization of government authority, where other level of government are dependent upon the central government. In such administration, power or authority is concentrated, usually with the national government or the central government. All the power exercised by the state or local government are those delegated by the central government. Confederation is associated with highly decentralized structure, and unitary system is associated with highly centralized or concentration of power. The third one is about federalism or federal system, where, as we have already discussed before, the administrations are those where there is distribution of power between the center and its constituent units or the states. In such a system of administration, the authority is granted, or the authority exercised by the government is derived from the people. Now here we can see example of the three types of government. In unitary system, power is derived from the national government or the central government and is delegated to the states. In other words, it is centralized, or powers are highly concentrated at the center. In the federal system, powers are derived from the people, and from the people it goes to the national and state government. More or less, the power will be distributed between the state and national government equally. In short, it is a divided power between the central and state government. In a confederation, power are derived from the units or the state government and goes towards the national government. In this kind of administration, the national government will be very weak except on some common ground, but the state government will be very, very powerful, and in some cases they will even have the right to seize it from the confederation. Example of unitary government could be Great Britain, and federal structure could be United States and India, and confederate structure or confederation could be those of European Union. Now, let's continue with the two types of federalism. One is dual federalism and another is cooperative federalism. Dual federalism is the type of federalism in which the center and states exercise exclusive authority in their respective spheres of jurisdiction. In other words, in a dual federalism, the center and state have their own spheres of jurisdiction and they cannot interfere in each other's jurisdiction. On the other hand, in the case of cooperative federalism, both levels of government, that is, the center and states, coordinate or cooperate their actions to solve national problems. The state and the center do not work as a separate entity, but they work together as one, and wherever possible, they will help out each other, they will reach out to each other, and they will jointly try to solve those national problems. Example of dual federalism is United States, and one good example of cooperative federalism is India. Here in this figure, we have dual federalism or layer cake federalism or cooperative federalism or marble cake federalism. In the first one, we can see that programs or authority are clearly divided among the national, state and local government, particularly between the national and state government. The powers or the authority are clearly divided. But in the case of cooperative federalism, authority are mixed among the national, state and local government. And in this kind of situation, often we will see interference of one to the spare of another. For example, in the case of India, we will often see the central government interfering in the business of the state. Now, let us come to the federal features of the Constitution of USA. In the previous lecture, we have discussed 14 features of United States Constitution, many of which are also features of federalism. In fact, the Constitution of USA is often considered as the best example of a federal system in the modern time. So we will try to record some of the features that we have already discussed, since it is also federal features of the United States Constitution. These are 13 points that I have chosen from the previous lecture. First, the United States has a written constitution. Second, the Constitution of the United States is one of the most rigid constitutions in the world. We will see this point more later. Third, there is constitutional division of powers between the center, all the national government, and its units, that is the states. Fourth, there is also supremacy of the Constitution. Article 6, Clause 2 of the United States Constitution, which is also popularly known as the Supremacy Clause, establishes the U.S. Constitution along with its federal statutes and treaties as the supreme law of the land. In other words, there is no other constitution or there is no other laws which are superior to the Constitution of the United States. Fifth, separation of powers here means that there is horizontal division of powers between the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary branch of the government, allowing each branch of government to act as a check and balance on the other branches. Whereas division of power means vertical division of power between the center and states, separation of power here means horizontal division of power or horizontal separation of power among the executive, legislative, and judiciary. 6. Checks and balances is a governmental structure that gives each of the branches or each of the three branches of the government a degree of control over the actions of the other. This helps in preventing one branch from becoming supreme or too powerful or too despotic, and also helps to protect the rights of the minorities from the majority, and also induce each of the branches to cooperate among themselves. 7. There is also the power of judicial review, which is vested in the hands of the Supreme Court. Here, the Supreme Court acts as the guardian of the Constitution and fundamental rights of the citizen and has the power of judicial review on any law enacted by the legislature. 8. United States has presidential form of government. In the case of India and UK, we have parliamentary form of government, but in USA, there is presidential form of government. Dual citizenship. In India, we have single citizenship. Wherever you are a citizen of India. But in the United States, they have dual citizenship, meaning one citizenship is meant for the whole of the country, that is United States citizenship, and another one is for the particular state to which a citizen belongs. 10. Popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty simply means that the power of the government is derived from the people. In other words, it is the elected representative of the people who form the government. This is as in any other democratic countries of the world, that the United States has a popular sovereignty. The United States also has a bicameral legislature, meaning the Congress is composed of two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives, or the lower house, has 435 members, and the Senate, or the upper house, has 100 members. The 12th point here is republicanism. United States has a republican form of government. In other words, the head of the state, that is the President of United States, is elected by the people. Not only at the center, but in each of the 50 states also, they have an elected head called the governor. So again, out of these 50 states, about 45 of them also has another officer called Lieutenant Governor, who is the most powerful officer in the state after the governor. The last one is Bill of Rights. The Constitution of the United States guarantees certain Bill of Rights or fundamental rights to its citizens. These Bill of Rights were not incorporated in the original draft of the Constitution, but were later added by the first 10 amendments of the Constitution of USA. Now let us look at how federalism works in USA. Federalism actually is a system of government in which sovereignty is constitutionally divided between the center and the state, or in the case of United States, the federal government and the 50 states. It is based upon the democratic rules and institutions in which powers are shared between the two. Here, when we talk about federalism in the modern sense, United States is often taken as a model of modern federalism. In the last more than 230 years, federal system has undergone tremendous change, as we know. So the current scenario, or the current situation of the federal system of government in United States can be analyzed under the following 7 heads. Now let us see these 7 points one after another. First, division of powers. In the Constitution of the United States, powers are constitutionally divided between the center and states, but there are also concurrent powers that are shared by both the state and the federal government, or there are also some powers which are exercised simultaneously by the center and state. These are called concurrent lists or concurrent powers. There are also residuary powers which are left to the individual states. In the case of India, residuary powers are given to the center, so we have a very strong center. But in United States, residuary powers, or those powers which are not clearly defined in the Constitution, are left to the individual states, making the states more powerful than the center. However, the states are also forbidden from certain subjects like making alliance with foreign powers, coinage, maintaining army, etc. In this table, we can clearly see the government powers in a federal structure. In the left column, we see the power under federal government, which are enumerated or written in the Constitution, and then we also have some powers which are prohibited or denied to the federal government, and last, which are implied or inherent. Implied or inherent simply means those subjects or those powers which are not clearly defined but which are implied or which are generally understood that it is part of the power of the central government. And in the right side, right column, we have those powers which are under state government. The first, in the top of the table, we see reserved powers, which means those powers which are exclusively for the state. And in the middle, we see prohibited or denied powers. These powers are not to be taken up by the state. Rather, these are reserved for the center or for the federal government. And in the bottom, we also see some implied or inherent powers which are not clearly written in the Constitution but are implicit or explicitly implied in the tradition of the United States. And in the middle, we have concurrent powers or those powers which are shared between the state and central government. Now, the second point is rigid constitution. The Constitution of the United States provides a very rigid procedure for amending the Constitution. So, in case there has to be constitutional amendment, first the proposal should be passed by 2/3 majority in each house of the Congress, that is the House of Representatives and the Senate, and should also be later ratified by 3/4 of the total number of states. Here we can see procedures for amending the Constitution. Now, there are two ways of amending the Constitution. In the left column, we see that if a Constitution is to be approved for amendment, first it has to be passed in the Congress, in both houses of the Congress, that is the House of Representatives and the Senate. Then after it is passed by 2/3 majority in both houses, it should be sent to the states for ratification. And among the 50 states, at least 3/4 of the states should ratify it. In the right column here, we also see another method of amending the Constitution. Here in this case, petition can be made by 2/3 of the states. Once a petition or a proposal for amending the Constitution comes from the states, it should be sent to the Congress. The Congress has to pass by 2/3 majority, and again it should be sent back to the states for ratification. So in this case, it should no longer be 2/3, but it should be 3/4, as in the other method. So this simply shows that it is very, very difficult to amend the Constitution. In fact, till now, since 1789, the Constitution of United States has been amended successfully only 27 times. The next point is Republican form of government. The federal government is not only a Republican government but also guarantees Republican form of government to every state. Both the center and state has Republican form of government, meaning to say the president at the center and the governor at the states are all elected by the people. Next is respect for territorial integrity. The United States has been very strong. One of the reasons is that the federal government cannot alter the territorial integrity of the states. Rather, it has to respect the territorial integrity of the state. It is the duty of the federal government to respect the states. It also has no power to alter the boundary of the states or create a new state out of the existing states without the consent of the affected states. Only if the states affected give their consent or with their, give their approval, only then the federal government can create a new states or can alter the boundary of the states. The next is protection against invasion and civil commotion. So, in case a state is under attack by external forces or even by internal forces, it is the duty of the federal government to protect the states against such invasion. On the other hand, it can also provide assistance to crush domestic violence or civil unrest if the states concerned ask for help. However, there are also situations where the central government can interfere in the affairs of the state without the approval of the state. But such cases should be only on the ground that federal laws are being violated or there is chances that federal properties are endangered. In case of violation of federal laws or destruction of federal property, the central government can interfere without the approval of the states to protect such from being destroyed. Obligation of states towards federal government. As we have just discussed, it is the duty of the federal government to respect the territorial integrity of the state and also to protect at times of danger. Similarly, the states also have its own obligation towards the federal government. The first is the states are obligated to conduct election for federal office, be it for the office of the president or House of Representatives or Senate. Whenever election time comes, the state government are obliged to conduct elections. Of course, the state government has their own rules of conducting such elections. Not only for the federal government, but the state should also conduct elections for the state level and local level offices. Now, last but not the least, judicial review. The Supreme Court and federal courts have the power of judicial review on any law enacted by the legislature. In case the legislative branch of the government pass a bill which is repugnant to the Constitution or which is in violation of the spirit of the Constitution, then the Supreme Court can always declare such law as unconstitutional and can declare it as ultra vires. It can also declare executive order issued by the president or the executive branch of the government as ultra vires if it goes against the Constitution. In other words, the Supreme Court acts as the guardian of the Constitution and also protect the fundamental rights of its citizens. Now, let's come to the next topic of our discussion, separation of powers. As we have already discussed before, when we talk about division of power, it is a vertical division of power between the center and states. But when we talk about separation of powers, it is a horizontal division of power or horizontal separation of powers between three equal government agencies or branches of government, that is the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. It is generally accepted that there are three main categories of governmental functions: legislative, executive, and judicial. Likewise, there are three main organs of the government in a state: legislature, executive, and judiciary, one each for one function. According to the theory of separation of power, these three powers, that is executive, legislative, and judiciary, must be kept separate and be exercised by three separate organs of the government. The federal government, following the principle of separation of power, is therefore composed of three distinct branches: legislative, executive, and judicial, whose powers are vested by the US Constitution in the Congress, the President, and the Supreme Court respectively. Whereas the Congress is the legislative branch of the government, the President is the executive branch, and the Supreme Court represent the judiciary branch. In fact, the principle of separation of power is one of the most important features of the Constitution of the United States. According to Professor Ong, no feature of American government, national, state, and often local is more characteristic than the separation of powers combined with precautionary checks and balances. There is no other major constitutions in the world in which the demarcation of the three wings of the government, that is, legislature, executive, and judiciary, is as clear as in the United States. Montesquieu, a French scholar who inspired the founding fathers of the American Constitution, found out that, or opined that, concentration of power in one person or a group of people results in tyranny. So in order to check arbitrariness, or in order to check any branch of the government becoming tyranny, or too powerful, or supreme over another, he felt the need for vesting the government power in three different organs of government. He stated that the doctrine of separation of powers in the following words: there would be an end of everything while the same man or same body, whether of the nobles or of the people, to exercise those three powers, thereof enacting laws, thereof executing the public resolutions, and of trying the causes of individuals. In a similar way, Jefferson, one of the founding fathers of the Constitution of USA, quoted that the concentration of legislative, executive, and judicial powers in the same hands is precisely the definition of despotic government. And like India, while the parliament consists of both the two houses and the president, in the United States, each of three wings is separate and distinct without being dependent on each other. Let me repeat again. In the context of India, the legislative branch of the government, that is, the parliament, is composed of both president and the two houses of the parliament, that is, the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. But in the case of USA, the legislative branch is composed of only the Congress, and it excludes the president. The president, on the other hand, is the executive branch, whereas the two houses, that is House of Representatives and the Senate, represent the legislative branch. Let us give some examples of how separation of power exists in the United States. First, the president has a fixed tenure and is not responsible to the Congress. The president is often elected for 4 years, and during this, he has to work independently and would not be responsible to the legislature. Second, the Congress is also, or the legislative branch of the government is also independent of the president. The president can neither prorogue nor dissolve or even preside over the sessions of the Congress. Third, the Supreme Court is also again independent of both the legislature and the executive. For instance, no judge of the Supreme Court who are appointed for life can be removed or can be removed from office except by following a very difficult impeachment process. Herman Feiner described this principle of separation of power as the American Constitution was consciously and elaborately made an essay in the separation of powers and is today the most important policy in the world which operates upon that principle. Now let's come to the third or last topic of our discussion: checks and balances. The principle of checks and balances and separation of powers are two sides of the same coin. This healthy combination of checks and balances and separation of powers is one of the most unique features of the Constitution of the world, or Constitution of USA. This kind of healthy relationship or healthy combination is found nowhere in the world. except in United States. Checks and balances is needed not only to prevent one branch of the government from becoming supreme or too powerful, but also to protect minority from the majority and to induce the branches to cooperate. Now, next point is, these checks and balances is a governmental structure that gives each of the three branches of government a degree of control over the actions of the other. In other words, this principle of checks and balances allow one branch of the government to limit the power of another. They balance each other from rising or from becoming too powerful. However, the American Constitution did not have a very, very clean severance of, or very, very clear separation of power. They are not separated into three watertight compartments. Rather, the three government branches are sometimes interdependent. Now let's see some of the role of the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary to prove that there is not only separation of power but also checks and balances. Now, the first article and first section of the Constitution of USA says that all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. In short, all legislative powers are vested in the hands of the Congress, which is the legislative branch of the government. The legislative branch, that is Congress, has the power to pass bills, impose taxes, control the federal budget, and borrow money on the credit of the United States. This implies that all the income and expenditures of the government, including those of the executive and judiciary, are to be decided by the Congress. The Congress have not only the power to pass bills but also to impose taxes, to collect or control federal budget, and to borrow money. The Congress has the sole power to declare as well as to raise, support, and regulate the military or the armed forces. Here we know that the military is part of the executive branch of the government, with the president as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. But it is the duty of the Congress or the legislative branch to decide how the military or how the armed forces has to be raised, how they should be utilized, and how they should be maintained. The Congress also defined by law the jurisdiction of the federal judiciary in cases not specified by the Constitution. Here, it means that the Supreme Court is actually the sole interpreter of the Constitution or the guardian of the Constitution. But in those areas, where the powers are not clearly specified in the Constitution, the Congress has the power to decide, or the Congress has the power to give their own version. The Senate, or the second chamber of the Congress, is in charge of ratifying treaties signed by the President and gives advice and consent to the presidential appointments to the federal, judiciary, and executive departments. Actually, it is the duty of the President to sign treaties with foreign countries and appoint important officers. But in all these matters, the Senate will always give its consent or will always ratify the decision of the President to become a law or to become valid. In this matter, the Senate acts as the balancing power towards the power of the President. Similarly, the House of Representatives has the sole power of impeachment. It is the sole power of the House of Representatives to impeach any offices in the United States government. Similarly, the Senate has the power to try those officials facing cases of impeachment. In other words, the Senate acts as the court of impeachment against the President and other high officials of the United States, including the judges of the Supreme Court. Though the Supreme Court is the court of all laws, the Senate at times acts as the court of impeachment. Now let's come to the role of the executive. The second article of the Constitution, Section 1, stated that the executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. In other words, the President represents the executive branch of the government. The President is also the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. The President is vested with the power to declare states of emergency, publishes regulations and executive orders, and make executive agreements and signs treaties. However, these treaties, which are already signed by the President, require the ratification or the approval of the Senate with a vote of two-thirds majority, meaning the President is not absolutely free to act on his own volition, but is always checked by the Senate. Again, the President execute the instructions of Congress. He may also veto bills and execute the spending authorized by Congress. The President, as the executive head of the state, has the power to execute or implement those laws passed by the Congress or those instructions given by the Congress. He also has the power to veto bills, because every bill passed by the Congress has to go to the President for his assent. So when it comes to the President for his assent, sometimes he can exercise his power of pocket veto and kill the bill. Similarly, the President or the executive branch also has the power to spend those budget or those money authorized by the Congress. The President has the power to make appointments to the federal judiciary, executive departments, and other posts with advice and consent of the Senate, and also has the power to make temporary appointments during the recess of the Senate. This means that all the appointments made by the President has to be with the knowledge or consent of the Senate. It is the duty of the President to appoint, but it is the duty of the Senate to see to it whether the right person is being appointed. However, in some cases, when the Senate is not in session, the President can make temporary appointment. The President also has the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, meaning he has the power to forgive or to pardon those people who have a case against the United States. That means cases of treason, cases of high crime. However, he cannot exercise this power in cases of impeachment. He cannot forgive those people who are being impeached. This power of pardoning for offenses is with the President alone, and no other position or no other officials in the American political setup has this power. Now let's come to the role of the judiciary. Article 3, Section 1 provides that the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The Supreme Court exercises the power of judicial review, reviews the constitutionality of laws, determines which laws Congress intended to apply to any given cases, and how Congress meant the law to apply. The Supreme Court can nullify any law passed by the Congress, or it can also nullify any executive order issued by the President if such laws or such executive orders are found to be at variance with the spirit of the Constitution. The power of judicial review, which is with the Supreme Court, sometimes assume the role of judicial veto. The President has the power of pocket veto. Similarly, the judiciary also can utilize or can exercise this power of judicial review as a judicial veto. This means that the Supreme Court has its role to check the working of the legislature as well as the executive. So, the judicial power of the Supreme Court extends to all cases, all laws, all treaties within the territory of United States. There is no area or there is no territory where the power of the Supreme Court cannot reach. The Supreme Court also determines how laws should be interpreted to assure uniformity. In other words, the Supreme Court also should determine how to interpret laws in order to suit the changing nature of the society. Here, it should be noted that the judiciary is not absolutely free because the Congress and the President keep a close watch on its activities. Constitutionally, it is independent from the Congress and the President, but at the same time, it is not absolutely free. For instance, the judges of the Supreme Court are appointed by the President. The Supreme Court cannot appoint its own judges. And again, this appointment should be with the consent or with the advice of the Senate. Similarly, the Congress determines not only the number of judges, but also its operation, including the salary of the judges. In the Constitution of the United States, there is no mention of a fixed number of Supreme Court judges. This number of judges should be determined by the Congress. At present, the Supreme Court of the United States has 9 judges, 1 Chief Justice and 8 Associate Judges. And not only this number of judges, but also how they are going to function, how they are going to operationalize their activities, and even how much salary they are supposed to get. All these things should be decided by the Congress. This means that the judges of the Supreme Court, or simply the judiciary, is not absolutely independent of the legislature and the executive. In other words, these 3 branches of the government are independent of each other. There is separation of powers, and at the same time, there is also the principle of checks and balances. Each of these branches has a check over the activities of the other 2. Now, let's look at some points of critical assessment about how separation of power and checks and balances work. From the above discussion that we had, it is clear that the principles of separation of powers and checks and balances are intertwined in the American constitutions. In other words, these 2 principles are combined in a very, very healthy manner. In fact, this is the primary feature of the American government, which is constantly manifest in the practices of the government and politics. There is no other government in the world, or there is no other major country in the world which has a combination of these two principles as in the United States. However, it may not be put out of place to point out that the principle of checks and balances, which were designed to promote equal share or equilibrium, often meant worse rather than reduce the ill effects of separation of power. Actually, the principle of checks and balances has been created or has been incorporated to reduce the negative impact of separation of power. But in some cases, instead of reducing the negative impact, it worsened the situation. For instance, the power of the president to veto a bill has been often misused or abused many times by the president. And in a similar case, the Senate also often stood as a stumbling block or as a barrier in the way of the president. Since all the important decisions of the president are to be approved by the Senate often block the president from taking up certain measures. For example, after the First World War, the Treaty of Versailles was signed and the League of Nations was formed. But though President Woodrow Wilson, the then President of the United States, was one of the main architects of the League of Nations, United States never become a member of the League of Nations because the decision of the President Woodrow Wilson was never approved by the Senate. In such cases, even at the international sphere, the Senate often acts as a stumbling block or as a barrier in the way of the president. Similarly, the Supreme Court too has been acting as a super legislature or a third chamber, implying that checks at times prove as irritant and eventually become an eyesore. Since the Supreme Court has the power of judicial review, or since it also has the power to advise the Congress to legislate on certain matters, it sometimes acts as a super legislature or third chamber, which implies that instead of acting as a check on the legislature, it sometimes becomes irritant or an eyesore to the other two branches of the government. In short, the principle of checks and balances, which was designed to promote overall equilibrium, often operate rather to aggravate, to make worse than ameliorate or to reduce the ill effects of separation of power, as in the case of the presidential veto and senatorial assent to treaties. However, this constitutional division, called separation of powers, is designed to prevent any branch of the government from becoming too powerful. In addition, the Constitution creates or incorporated the principle of checks and balances by providing the means by which each branch is required to work with the other branches in order to carry out its functions. In spite of its many defects, the principle of separation of powers and checks and balances has more positive points to contribute towards the functioning of the United States or the governance of the United States of America than its own negative impact. In short, these principles, or a healthy combination of these two principles, have done wonders in the working of the Constitution of United States. Thank you. In the next class, we will discuss about the Office of the President of United States. Till then, bye-bye. Take care.